Be me a couple of years into my university degree. Just trying to get through it, you know? My major is something that actually leads to a job. Think numbers, concrete facts, things that are either right or wrong. I like it that way. Simple. The university, in its infinite wisdom, requires everyone to take a certain number of humanities courses to become well-rounded. Whatever that means. It just feels like a way to make you pay for more classes you don't need. I scroll through the course catalog looking for the path of least resistance. Found a course called Introduction to Modern Social Structures. Sounds harmless enough. Probably talk about governments and economies. Easy A, I figured. That was my first mistake. My friend, let's call him Scott, signed up for it too. We were in the same boat, just wanted to check a box and move on. First day of class. We walk into the lecture hall and find a spot in the back. The room is about 60% female, which is pretty standard for these types of classes. The professor walks in, a woman in her mid-40s. She has that look, the one that says she's deeply disappointed in the world, and it's somehow your personal fault. She introduces herself in the course. Within the first 5 minutes, it's clear this isn't going to be about governments or economies. The entire lecture is about power dynamics and systemic inequity. Every other sentence contains the phrase, toxic masculinity. Scott and I just look at each other. We knew right then we had made a terrible mistake. She has this way of talking where she splits the world into two teams. No nuance, no middle ground. You're either with her or you're part of the problem. The girls in the front rows are nodding along, taking vigorous notes. A few of them look back at the guys in the room with this look of pity and accusation. It felt like we were already on trial for something. The first couple of weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. She'd ask a question to the class. If a girl raised her hand, the professor would beam, "Yes, an excellent point. Thank you for that valuable insight." If a guy raised his hand, her face would tighten. She'd listen with her arms crossed, head tilted, like she was just waiting for him to say something she could dismantle. One guy tried to offer a different perspective on a topic. She cut him off mid-sentence, told him his viewpoint was a textbook example of unexamined male privilege, and that he needed to do the work of listening to other voices instead of centering his own. The guy just sank in his chair and didn't speak for the rest of the semester. After that, none of the guys ever asked questions again. We learned the rules of the game: stay silent, be invisible. Scott and I would just sit in the back and text each other, making fun of the buzzwords. It was our only way to stay sane. She made it clear that your grade wasn't just about what you knew, but about whether you understood her perspective, which really just meant agreeing with her, loudly and often. Assignments were all essays on vague topics. Things like, discuss how your personal identity intersects with societal power structures. It was impossible to get a good grade if you were a guy. I tried to write a neutral, well-researched paper. Got a CE with a note that said I failed to meaningfully engage with the core concepts of the material. Scott wrote a paper basically saying the same thing but got a D. His note said he exhibited a concerning lack of self-awareness. Meanwhile, a girl who sat near us got an A+ for a paper that was just a page and a half of pure word salad about her feelings. We saw her showing it to her friends. It was barely coherent, but it was the right kind of incoherent. It was frustrating, but we figured we could just scrape by with a passing grade and be done with it. Then came the announcement about the midterm exam. The professor stood at the front of the room with that smug little smile of hers. She said the midterm would account for 40% of our final grade. It was designed to be a rigorous evaluation of our comprehension and critical engagement. You could feel the anxiety spike in the room, at least on the male side of it. The day of the exam arrived. It was one of those classic in-class pen and paper deals. She walks in carrying 2 stacks of papers. They're clearly different colors. One is light blue, one is light green. Scott nudges me. Dude, look at that. 2 different tests. I shrugged it off. It's probably just to stop people from cheating. Version A and version B, you know? He didn't look convinced, but we dropped it. The professor starts handing them out. She walks down one aisle, handing the blue papers only to the female students. Then she walks down our aisle, handing the green papers to all the male students. It wasn't subtle. It was methodical. My heart sank. Scott was right. This wasn't right. She gets back to the front of the room. You have 1 hour. Begin. I flip the paper over. It's 3 long-form essay questions. The first question: analyze the semiotics of patriarchal expression in post-industrial media landscapes and discuss its role in perpetuating hegemonic masculinity. I read it 3 times. I had no idea what it was even asking. It used terms we'd never even heard in the lecture. I look at the second question. It was even worse. Something about epistemological frameworks of oppression and intersectional paradigms. This wasn't a test. It was an execution. I look up. Every single guy in the room has the same look on his face, a mixture of panic and defeat. Pencils weren't moving. People were just staring at the page. Then I look over at the girls. They were writing away, furiously, confidently. Some of them were already on their second page. There was no struggle, no hesitation, just the sound of their pens flying across the paper. The hour felt like an eternity and a few seconds all at once. I spent the whole time just trying to write something, anything, that sounded vaguely intelligent. I threw in every buzzword I could remember from her lectures, hoping something would stick. It felt like trying to build a house with smoke. When she finally called time, I hadn't even finished the second question. I handed in my paper, feeling completely dejected. Scott and I walked out of the lecture hall without saying a word. We knew we had just bombed it. We weren't the only ones. All the guys were gathered outside, comparing notes. Everyone had the same impossible questions. Everyone was lost. A week later, the grades were posted online. I logged in with a sense of dread. I scrolled down to the course name. Midterm exam, 18100. Grade, F. My stomach dropped. I had never gotten a grade that low in my entire life. I immediately texted Scott. He got a 22100, also an F. We started a group chat with a few of the other guys from the class. The story was the same for every single one of them. F's and D's across the board. The highest grade any guy got was a 45. Then the girls started posting in the main class discussion forum. OMG got a 98 on the midterm. So easy. Right? I was worried, but I got a 95. She's such a fair marker. Anyone get less than an A? LOL. It was a slap in the face. They weren't just succeeding, they were gloating. One of them even posted a comment saying, maybe the guys should spend less time on video games and more time studying. The rage I felt was cold and sharp. This wasn't about academics. This was a targeted attack. Scott was furious. I told you it was 2 different tests. We have to do something. But what could we do? Go to the dean? It would be our word against hers. A bunch of failing male students versus a female professor. We knew exactly how that would play out. We'd be labeled as entitled, angry men who couldn't handle a challenging course. They'd probably make us attend a sensitivity training workshop. We were trapped. Scott, however, wasn't ready to give up. We need proof, he said. Undeniable proof. The next day, we came up with a plan. It felt kind of grimy, but we were desperate. We saw one of the girls from our class who was always talking about how easy it was. We went up to her, putting on our best friendly, non-threatening faces. I was the one who did the talking. Hey, sorry to bother you, We did really poorly on the midterm, and we're trying to figure out what we did wrong. Would you mind if we took a look at your test, just to see what a good answer looks like?" She looked us up and down, a little skeptical. Then she gave this pitying smile. "Oh, you poor things. I heard some people found it difficult." She pulled the blue paper out of her binder. "Sure, I guess. Don't copy it for the final, though," she said with a little laugh. We thanked her profusely and said we'd just take a quick picture of it for reference. She shrugged and let us. We walked away, and as soon as we were around the corner, we pulled out the photo on my phone. We huddled over it, and the injustice of it all hit us like a physical blow. Her first question was, "Define social structure and provide 3 examples from your daily life." Her second question, "Who was Karl Marx and what was his main theory about class conflict?" Her third question, "Explain the difference between equity and equality." These were questions from a high school textbook. They were simple, direct, and based entirely on the core material of the first few lectures. There was no jargon, no philosophical traps, no academic gibberish. It was a completely different test, an infinitely easier test. We finally had the proof, black and white, or rather, blue and green. We had the evidence of a system rigged against us. The problem was, what to do with it. We still had the same dilemma. If we took this to the university administration, she would find a way to spin it. She'd say it was an equitable assessment model. She'd claim she was using differentiated instruction to challenge different groups of students appropriately. She'd bury them in academic jargon and social justice rhetoric until they just gave up. And we would still be the bad guys. Frustrated, we decided on a direct and probably stupid approach. We decided to confront her ourselves. We looked up her office hours, Tuesday afternoon. We walked to her office, hearts pounding. We felt like we were walking into the lion's den. Her door was open. She was sitting at her desk, typing away. A couple of her star female students were sitting in the chairs opposite her, chatting with her like old friends. We knocked on the doorframe. She looked up, and the smile on her face vanished the second she saw us. It was replaced by a look of profound annoyance. "Yes?" she asked, her tone dripping with impatience. The 2 other students turned and stared at us, their expressions equally unwelcoming. I took a deep breath. "Professor, can we talk to you for a moment about the midterm?" She sighed dramatically. "I've already told a dozen of your classmates that I don't regrade exams just because you're unhappy with the outcome." Scott stepped forward. "This isn't about the grade. It's about the test itself." He pulled out his phone and showed her the side-by-side pictures. Our impossible green test next to the girls' laughably easy blue test. We noticed there were 2 different versions of the exam. Could you explain why they were so drastically different in difficulty? We expected her to get defensive, to deny it, to stammer. She did none of those things. She glanced at the phone, then looked back at us, and a slow, smug smile spread across her face. It was the most condescending expression I have ever seen. She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. The 2 girls in her office were now openly smirking. They knew what was going on. They were in on it. The professor looked at us like we were insects. "Are you familiar with the concept of a handicap in golf?" she asked, her voice calm and patronizing. "You give the weaker players an advantage to make the game fair. I view my classroom the same way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was admitting it, proudly. "So, you're saying you deliberately gave us a harder test?" I asked, my voice shaking a little with anger. "I'm saying," she said, leaning forward, "that for centuries, the educational system was designed by men, for men. It rewards a very specific type of aggressive, linear thinking that privileges the male brain. My methods are simply an attempt to correct that imbalance." She gestured to the 2 girls beside her. "Some students come into this classroom already at a disadvantage, burdened by societal expectations and historical oppression. Others, she said, looking directly at us, come in with a lifetime of unearned privilege. My job is to create equity, true equity, and sometimes that means challenging the privileged and supporting the marginalized. It's not my fault if you find that challenge uncomfortable. It was a perfectly crafted, academically sound speech that was complete and utter nonsense. It was a justification for blatant, vindictive discrimination. Scott was about to explode. I could see it in his eyes. "So, this is fair to you?" he managed to say through clenched teeth. She just smiled that infuriating smile again. Fairness doesn't mean treating everyone the same. It means giving everyone what they need to succeed. Perhaps what you need is a bit more intellectual rigor to help you overcome your toxic conditioning. She then turned to the girls. Now, as we were saying about Foucault, she had dismissed us, completely and totally. We were left standing there, humiliated, in front of her giggling disciples. There was nothing else to say. We turned and walked away. The sound of their laughter followed us down the hall. We walked all the way across campus and just sat on a bench, not saying anything for a long time. The feeling of powerlessness was suffocating. We were right, and we had proof. But it didn't matter. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed to. It was a machine built to protect people like her and crush people like us. Any attempt to fight it through official channels would be suicide. We sat there for maybe half an hour. The sun started to set. Finally, Scott broke the silence. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring off into the distance, a strange look on his face. It wasn't defeat anymore. It was something else, something cold and hard. "Okay," he said quietly. "There's no point in playing their game anymore." He turned to me, his eyes now focused and intense. "It's time we start playing our own." I just looked at Scott, not really understanding what he meant. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that we can't win by following the rules," he said, his voice completely flat. "Because she sets the rules. The university sets the rules. The whole system is her playing field." He stood up and started pacing in front of the bench. We tried to be reasonable. We tried to be direct. And she laughed in our faces. She admitted to everything because she knows she's untouchable. She has academic freedom and a whole ideology to back her up. He stopped and looked right at me. "So, we're not going to go to the dean. We're not going to file a complaint. We're going to burn her to the ground using her own arrogance against her." A plan started to form right there on that bench. It was risky. It was underhanded. And it was our only shot. The core of the idea was simple. Her biggest strength was her towering ego. She was so convinced of her own moral and intellectual superiority that she couldn't imagine anyone ever successfully challenging her. That ego was the crack in her armor. We just had to figure out how to break it wide open. The final exam was in 3 weeks. We needed something concrete, something that couldn't be explained away with academic jargon. We needed her own words, spoken in her own voice, admitting exactly what she was doing. Scott's plan was audacious. He was going to go back to her office hours, but this time he was going to go alone. He wasn't going to go as an angry student. He was going to go as a convert. It took us a few days to get the script right. We rehearsed it. He had to be completely convincing. The following week, he went. I was waiting outside the building, so nervous I thought I was going to be sick. He had his phone in his shirt pocket, set to record audio. He walked into her office. I found out later there were a couple of other students there again, her usual fan club. Scott started his performance. He told her he'd been thinking a lot about their last conversation. He said that at first he was angry, but then he realized she was right. He told her he'd been blind to his own privilege his whole life, and that her challenging midterm was the wake-up call he needed. He laid it on thick. He used her own buzzwords against her. He talked about unlearning his toxic programming and wanting to become a better ally. According to Scott, her entire demeanor changed. The sneer was gone, replaced by a look of triumphant vindication. She had broken one of us. Her methods were working. The other students in the room were looking at Scott with newfound respect. He was the lost sheep who had seen the light. She gestured for him to sit down. She asked him what had brought about this change of heart. Scott told her he was fascinated by her pedagogical strategy. He said he thought it was brave and revolutionary. He asked her if she could explain the theory behind it more, because he wanted to truly understand it. He had handed her a golden invitation to monologue about her favorite subject, herself, and she took it. For the next 15 minutes, with the recorder capturing every single word, she laid out her entire discriminatory philosophy. She bragged about it. She called her two-tiered testing system a necessary corrective action in a world that coddles men from birth. She explained in excruciating detail how she carefully calibrated the difficulty of the men's exams to be just on the edge of impossible to induce a sense of intellectual humility. She mentioned that the women's exams were designed to be empowering and confidence-building to counteract the systemic discouragement they face elsewhere. She even laughed as she described watching the male students' faces during the midterm, calling it a valuable learning experience for them, even if they don't realize it. One of the other girls in the room chimed in, saying she thought it was a brilliant idea and that all professors should do it. The professor agreed, saying that one day people would look back on her methods as pioneering. Scott just sat there, nodding along, asking an occasional question to keep her talking. He played his part perfectly. When she was done, he thanked her, saying she had given him so much to think about. He walked out of that office, got outside, and took the deepest breath of his life. He met me, and we walked back to my apartment without saying a word. We sat down, he took out his phone, and he hit play. We listened to the entire recording. It was worse than we could have ever imagined. It was a 15-minute crystal-clear confession filled with arrogance and contempt. It was our weapon. We didn't act immediately. We waited. We knew timing was everything. We spent the next week just going through the motions, attending her class, keeping our heads down. She'd occasionally look at Scott and give him a small, knowing smile. She thought he was on her team now. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. The night before the final exam, the entire university was on edge, everyone cramming for their tests. That's when we decided to strike. We created a throwaway email address and a burner account on every social media platform we could think of. We drafted a post. It was simple, direct, and factual. Subject: evidence of systematic discrimination in course name. The body of the post was just a few lines. For anyone who has taken this course, here is proof of the professor's grading practices. Attached are 2 files. The first is a side-by-side comparison of the midterm exams given to male and female students. The second is an audio recording of the professor explaining her methods in her own words. We attached the picture of the 2 exams, also MP3 file. Then we hit send. We posted it on the university's main subreddit. We posted it on the student-run Facebook pages. We sent it to the campus newspaper. We sent it to a few online blogs that we knew would be very interested in this kind of story. And then we shut my laptop, turned off our phones, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and the world had changed. When I turned on my phone, it was immediately overwhelmed with notifications. The story was everywhere. The subreddit post had thousands of upvotes and hundreds of comments. Guys from previous years were coming out of the woodwork, sharing their own horror stories from her classes. I thought I was just stupid. This explains everything. She failed me on a paper because I quoted a male author. She said his perspective was irrelevant. My GPA took a permanent hit because of this class. I'm so glad someone finally exposed her. The Facebook posts were being shared by the thousands. Parents were commenting, outraged. Alumni were commenting, disgusted. By mid-morning, the campus newspaper had run a front-page story on it. The audio file was the kill shot. No one could argue with it. There was no ambiguity. It was a direct, proud confession of discrimination. We went to take the final exam. It was supposed to start at 9 a.m. We get to the lecture hall, and there's a crowd of students outside, all talking. The air is buzzing. The professor is nowhere to be seen. A few minutes later, the department head, a flustered-looking man in a rumpled suit, shows up. He announces that due to unforeseen circumstances, the final exam has been canceled. A huge cheer went up from the crowd. He then announced that the university was launching a full and immediate investigation into the allegations. He looked terrified. The university's PR machine was in full meltdown. The fallout was swift and brutal. The story got picked up by local news, then national news outlets. It became a case study in academic malpractice. The professor was immediately placed on administrative leave. She released a statement through her lawyer claiming the recording was taken out of context and that her methods were academically sound and pedagogically justified. Nobody bought it. The audio was too damning. A week later, we got an email from the university registrar. It stated that due to the extraordinary circumstances, all grades for our class for that semester were being retroactively changed. Every single student was given a pass grade, which would not affect our GPAs. It was a total victory. We didn't have to suffer for her insanity. 2 weeks after that, the university quietly updated its faculty directory. Her name was gone. Her profile page was a 404 error. An internal email later confirmed that she had been separated from the university. She was fired. Scott and I went out for a beer that night to celebrate. We sat at a table, not really saying much. It was surreal. We had been two guys, backed into a corner, with a system designed to ignore us. We had no power, no authority, no one on our side. But we had the truth, and we had a plan. We saw firsthand that these people, who act so high and mighty, so untouchable, are often just bullies with a fancy vocabulary. Their ideology is a house of cards, and all it takes is one good push to bring the whole thing down. The best part was, she never knew it was us. We were just two more faces in the crowd. To her, we were just a couple of the dumb, privileged boys she held in such contempt. She never realized that those same boys were the ones who orchestrated her downfall, and that, I think, is the most satisfying justice of all.